Saint Maud is a psychological horror movie and the latest horror to be released by A24. It was written and directed by Rose Glass, her debut feature film, and stars Morfydd Clark as the titular saint. Saint Maud first showed at the Toronto International Film Festival all the way back in 2019, and despite a few select screenings has only recently been released widely on VOD. The film stars Maud, a lonely, reclusive nurse who once worked in a hospital, but following a traumatic event transitions to private in-house care. We're given a glimpse of this event in the very beginning, but the exact context is not made entirely clear. However, it's not long before we see that the trauma and guilt attached to the event has crippled her emotionally. She finds her primary method of coping through religion, and as we see very early on, she's very pious about her faith, bordering on the zealot side of the spectrum. Glass uses narration to firmly plant us in Maud's head, crafting her film into a first-person narrative that forces us to wonder whether or not that narrator is entirely reliable. Although that narrative is slow at times, I never found my patience to be whittled too thin. Saint Maud is a very engaging kind of character study, one that offers us a character whose situation and perspective may be foreign to most, while incorporating resonating universal themes to help us understand the reasons behind her character arc and her intentions. Bundle in a tremendous supporting performance, excellent sound design, a terrifying score, and interesting cinematography in a scenic coastal town, and Saint Maud became a film that I really enjoyed, one that certainly overexceeded any expectations I had for it, and one that will stick with me for a while. For the next part of this video, I will be diving headfirst into the plot, spoilers and all, so if you haven't seen Saint Maud yet, highly recommend you hit pause on this video and go check it out and come back when you're done. So when we first meet Maud, she's already fully ingrained in her religion, praying to God and pleading for him to reveal the greater purpose that she believes she is destined to fulfill. She shuffles off to an isolated mansion on the outskirts of town where she begins her work, caring for Amanda, a famous dancer and choreographer who is suffering from an advanced form of cancer. The writing is essentially on the wall for Amanda, and she knows it. This causes Amanda to develop a nihilistic attitude towards her looming demise, a complete contrast to Maud's feverishly religious outlook. As the two get to talking, Maud realizes that God has gifted her with the greater purpose she asked for, the opportunity to save the soul of an atheist. Maud becomes obsessed with this new task of hers, and Amanda mostly indulges her despite being unshakable in her lack of belief. Conflict arises when Maud confronts Amanda's sexual partner Carol, believing somewhat self-righteously that the debauchery they are indulging in is only jeopardizing Amanda's opportunity at redemption. Carol reluctantly agrees to step out of Amanda's life, but later on she shows up to Amanda's birthday party, and when Amanda confronts Maud with the futility of her soul-saving project, Maud slaps her, losing the job in the process. Feeling abandoned by God, she goes out to the bar and engages in the same kind of debauchery she resented Amanda for. Later on, while sleeping with a random guy, we get major insights into Maud's psyche and her past. Her hands pressed on the guy's chest in the same way you would if you were giving CPR, she has a kind of PTSD flashback where his chest collapses. Judging by the horrified manner in which she reacts, we may be able to assume that this is the event that afflicted her with trauma in the first place. The same trauma she is repressing, and the same trauma that magnetized her towards Christianity. The guy throttles her with some comments that imply Maud had a hedonistic past prior to her religious conversion. After that night, God begins creeping back into her life, causing a levitating episode and communicating with her in Welsh. His reemergence into her life persuades Maud to persevere with the mission of saving Amanda's soul, so the next night she sneaks off to Amanda's mansion, and after her nurse leaves, sneaks into her bedroom. Amanda is weaker and frailer than before, and likely much closer to becoming acquainted with her maker. Amanda apologizes to Maud for being unkind, and Maud tries to bless her with holy water. Ever closer to her death and no longer feeling chained to compelled courtesy, Amanda derides Maud's religion, not mincing words in rejecting her beliefs. Maud then visualizes Amanda's mask slipping, turning into a demon and mocking her and flinging her across the room. Maud brutally stabs her to death, and the next day is seen donning a pair of angel wings, presumably gifted to her by God for dispatching the demon Amanda truly was. Maud goes to a beach the next day and pours acetone all over herself. As she lights herself ablaze, the bystanders drop to their knees, observing Saint Maud as she ascends into heaven. And then, with one hard cut, Rose Glass slices through all the ambiguity the film built up in favor of giving us a firm reality check. But should she have preserved the uncertainty? While it would have salvaged any real debate to the authenticity of Maud's beliefs, seeing our protagonist crisp up into a meaningless inferno is an astonishingly haunting and unsettling image to be left with. It's certainly the image that brands the deepest mark in my mind. Glass's decision is bold, but in my opinion, it dramatically improves the final product. Instead of leaving us with a kind of average, good but not great horror flick that you might not remember in a week's time, Glass's choice burns a harrowing cautionary tale into our minds. But what exactly is it that we're being cautioned against? The characters of Maud and Amanda are similar in the fact that they were both very isolated people. That's emphasized very clearly early on. We see Maud eating alone and living alone in her cramped apartment, and we see Amanda living alone in her spacious mansion. The size differential of their living spaces may be significant in distinguishing the wealth gap between the two, but that theme isn't really explored too deeply. What I think is more likely is that the juxtaposition between mansion and apartment represents the capacity of both characters to let people into their lives. Amanda is painted as a very social kind of person. Despite not knowing Maud too well in the beginning, Amanda confides in her and admits she does not want to be alone. We also see Amanda hosting friends often and eventually throws a packed birthday party for herself. Maud, on the other hand, is completely reclusive. She doesn't really have any friends and even writes off the one acquaintance who shows any concern for her. God is the only company she needs, and her only socialization comes when she prays to him in still solitude.
You must be the loneliest girl I've ever seen.
Human beings are social creatures, and we always have been since our hunter-gatherer days. Our uncanny ability to form tight social bonds and accomplish goals as a collective is part of what separates Homo sapiens from any other species. So while the modern human is better able to function in seclusion by comparison, a perpetual state of loneliness is still unnatural. It goes against our biological programming and for the most part makes us miserable. As everyone knows throughout history, there haven't been many institutions that are as effective at building communities and consolidating groups of people as the church, or religion in general. So it's definitely odd that we don't see Maud go to church or mingle with any other faithful Christians. Her relationship with the God is extremely personal. Glass does a good job of curtailing opportunities to plug in shameless exposition, leaving important bits of information scattered around like Easter eggs. A number of these Easter eggs hint at the fact that Maud was once a very outgoing person who bordered on being overly decadent. Certainly someone that the religious Maud would resent. Someone that we briefly see surface when she thinks God has forsaken her. With these clues, we may be able to infer that Maud once had a sprawling social life. One that came to a sudden end when the patient in her backstory passed away. Any friends she may have had might have shunned her, or contact could have faded as she became more reclusive, but regardless, the result is the same: a shattered sense of self. Her throbbing trauma, extreme loneliness, and gaping sense of purpose in the world added fuel to the fire of her future delusions. Wherever you may stand on the subject of religion, I believe two of the major functions that attract so many people to flock to churches, synagogues, and mosques are the answers to existential questions and the sense of community that come along with religion. However, both of these become perverted for Maud. Her religion only isolates her further, and her assurance of her place in heaven shepherds her towards an untimely and painful death. This aspect of St. Maud could lead one towards reading the film as an anti-religion piece, but I personally believe that interpretation is a bit too simplistic. In my personal interpretation of the film, Maud used religion as a sort of drug. A drug that numbed her from the pain and the guilt of the trauma she felt. A drug that justified her withdrawal from the rest of the world. A drug that made her feel alive and gave her a legitimate why to the conundrum of existence. Maud's religion ensured that her pain would not be wasted. In an early scene, one of Amanda's friends tells her that she's becoming dangerously Norma Desmond. This line is a reference to Billy Wilder's 1950 film Sunset Boulevard, in which Norma Desmond, an older reclusive silent film star, becomes entrenched in narcissistic delusions about the state of her stardom. She insists that she's still a star being obsessively pined over by directors and movie executives. In her isolation and loneliness, she insists and truly believes that she is still a big deal. However, the sad truth is that no one really cares about her, and she's mostly forgotten to the world. Amanda was the one being compared to the silent film star, but Maud's feet fit much better in Norma's shoes. Maud's lonely life was a fertile environment for her delusions to grow in. Being social and sharing your perspective with others has a way of exposing the weaknesses in your armor. Thoughts and ideas that may seem logical to a deluded mind, but dangerous in reality. Any good friends would certainly challenge delusions of grandeur or of martyrdom, but when you're left on your own, there are no differing perspectives to backstop concerning fantasies and no external accountability to stop bizarre and worrisome ideas from festering in the mind. Another famous character from film history that Maud could be compared to is Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. In an interview, Rose Glass even went as far as to say that Maud is like a female version of Travis Bickle.
Try imagining if Travis Bickle was a English Catholic woman living in a small English seaside town.
And to me, the comparison is fairly clear. Both characters suffer from severe loneliness, both are morally self-righteous, and both grapple with existential questions of purpose and meaning. Both find that meaning in saving victims of filth and debauchery from their situations. Bickle, however, was not a religious man, showing that the kind of delusions Maud suffered from are not exclusive to religion. They're not exclusive to anything in particular. Violent and harmful delusions can manifest in any idea or ideology, but ultimately what brings it about is loneliness. True cosmic loneliness. Not having the diversity of thought and mental pushback that comes from socializing and exposing yourself to various perspectives fosters a concrete belief that the lonely person's delusions are in fact genuine, and if those delusions are malevolent, either directly or indirectly, well, we can imagine the potential consequences. Saint Maud is a film that warns us about the dangers of withdrawing completely from the world, while at the same time turning the mirror on ourselves and compelling us into a dialogue with ourselves. It reassures us of the monumental importance of friendship and community, but also I think encourages us to be more kind to others. After all, on the surface it would have been very difficult for anyone else to see the storm brewing inside Maud's head. We never really know what a person may be disguising under a tired face and forced smile. It has to be said that Saint Maud has become much more significant in the short period of time since its release. Thematically, the film feels like an eerie piece of foreshadowing to the pandemic. Unexpectedly, worldwide lockdowns suddenly threw many people into states of compelled loneliness. The multitude of alone time makes a lot of people uneasy because time by ourselves, minus the sometimes welcome distractions that can come from work and other people, forces us to ponder the big questions of meaning and purpose. It forces us into a situation that temporarily simulates Maud's situation. Today, that loneliness is faced by so many more people. The pandemic will end eventually, but the issue of loneliness won't end. As social media apps tinker with brain chemistry and we become more accustomed to living in front of screens, loneliness only will become more and more of an issue. An issue that we can fight by ensuring that our social networks are solidified and by ensuring that we do not withdraw from the world in the same way that Maud did.